Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on X at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X. A very warm welcome to Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. Back in 2019, Walter Hamada, the then president of DC Films, was planning on replacing Henry Cavill's Superman in the DCEU with Sasha Calle's Supergirl, which is one of the most outrageous decisions ever made, but it got much worse than that. It was soon announced that J.J. Abrams would be producing a black Clark Kent, a black Kal-El, last son of Krypton, Superman movie set outside the premise of the DC Extended Universe. The film would be written by activist Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I think we all know what type of shit that movie was going to be about. Apparently it was going to be set in the 90s or something like that. So that's what they were planning on doing. Also, they announced a Val Zod HBO Max, as the streaming service was called at the time, Val Zod Superman series. So they were going all in on a Latinx Supergirl and two black versions of Superman. So they were deleting, in all intents and purposes, a white Superman. They were rewriting Superman history. That's what they were doing. They wanted rid of Cavill. They weren't getting on with him. Creatively, Cavill is a problem to woke Hollywood. We've seen the issues with Cavill and the people making The Witcher, because Cavill cares about Superman, cares about, the Witcher character as well. So that's what they decided to do. So yesterday, James Gunn was asked by a fan, I think on Threads, if the Black Superman J.J. Abrams produced movie was still in active development. Gunn merely responded by saying yes. Now this is very, very interesting, because why? Why is this film still in active development? Think about this very, very carefully. James Gunn claims that him and Saffron are totally in charge of DC. They're the CEOs of DC Studios. Why is a film that was greenlit nearly 5 years ago still in active development when they're supposed to be starting again with a brand new franchise, with brand new ideas? Well, this is how Hollywood studios work, because that Superman movie may and probably will never get made. But because of a contractual obligation with that film, it has to stay in active development. I think it's important you understand that, everyone, that you're not suddenly going to hear about a black Superman being cast. I mean, maybe you will. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it would be absolutely ridiculous all of a sudden if we had two Superman movies in active development. You would think, Mick, as a Superman fan, wouldn't that excite you? No. One Superman project at a time, please. That would be ridiculous. But of course, this film, most probably, in all intents and purposes, will never happen. But I think it just shows you how bad this studio still is in its running. Because as co-CEO of DC Studios, James Gunn doesn't want that film to be developed. If that film was realistically being developed, Gunn would spit his dummy out. He doesn't want the Batman from Matt Reeves to be a thing. He doesn't want that sequel. He don't want the Penguin series. It was here when he arrived. Personally, I do, because Matt Reeves is a genius. He did a good film, right? So I'm excited for Penguin and the Batman too. Of course I am. But James Gunn's also developing another Batman movie. Two Batmen. Doesn't make sense to me. Don't see how that works. Yes, I know one will be different. I'm excited to see what they do with Brave and the Bold. I'm not saying I'm not excited for that movie. But two different versions of Batman is going to confuse people, and it's rather silly. But because James Gunn is developing this brand new franchise, he wants a Batman within it. And he doesn't feel he shouldn't have a Batman. He doesn't feel he should be punished because there is another version of Batman in DC Elseworlds. So we have this Superman movie that was greenlit, as I say, nearly 5 years ago. And the question is, why is it still in active development? Why would anyone, who is not embarrassed, who must be embarrassed actually, that this film is still in active development? As I say, it's just a contractual thing. But as we were talking about yesterday, that whole thing of Sasha Calle replacing Cavill in the DCEU, the Val Zod series, the Black Clark Kent, was all about burying the Snyderverse. And, who actually wanted this? Who was actually cheering about this apart from a couple of idiots? No one. Black actor Ray Fisher even spoke out against what they were attempting to do, because he knew it was all about burying the Snyderverse. How can there be a new leadership at Warner Brothers? How can there be a new leadership genuinely at DC when we're hearing a film that was greenlit nearly 5 years ago is still in active development? But of course, active development means jack shit. There's hundreds of projects in active development at Warner Brothers and every single fucking studio in Hollywood. It means nothing. It just means they're not allowed to officially cancel it, as I say, because of contractual obligations. Now, yesterday, James Gunn posted a very exciting picture. He was in the snow somewhere, scouting for locations for the Fortress of Solitude in his Superman movie, Superman Legacy. And it's interesting, the questions James Gunn answers, because let's be honest, he didn't have to answer this question. So why did he? Did he feel uncomfortable about ignoring that question just in case people started adding 2 and 2 and saying, well, it's not happening, he didn't answer it? I don't know why he answered it. I don't know why he can't knock the movie on its head. But for a minute, let's talk about this J.J. Abrams produced movie. Now, unlike a lot of people, probably mostly Star Wars fans, I'm a Star Wars fan as well, unlike those people, I have a lot of respect, for Abrams creatively. He gave me Alias. He gave me Fringe. He gave me Lost. For me, in television terms, J.J. Abrams is a genius. You may laugh at that. What went wrong with J.J. was because he was so successful with television, he was promoted very, very quickly and became very big and powerful in Hollywood. They wanted him to start making movies, and he did. And it was too much for him. It's a bit like me. I got a job in a DIY shop, right? So customers would come in and start asking me about what nail they needed to buy for this, that. I didn't know what the fuck to tell them, so I was just selling them the wrong nails, right? And it's very similar to J.J. Abrams, right? He was a TV guy. He was an ideas man, right? A very capable writer-director in television. But it's a difference between doing old school broadcast TV drama to making the pinnacle of films. Personally, I love Star Trek 2009. I think he did a good job with his casting and the movie. And I don't mind the lens flares either. I know people made a big deal about the lens flares. But Star Trek Into Darkness, I think, as a sci-fi movie, that would be really cool what he did there in terms of terrorism in space and in the future. But it's not a Star Trek movie. That's the problem. And no Star Trek fan wanted that as the subject matter in that movie. And I understand why people hated it. It was a rip-off of the Wrath of Khan, and it wasn't a very good rip-off at that. I understand why people hate that movie. But my love for J.J. Abrams comes from, as I say, Lost, Alias, Fringe. In those terms, the man's a genius, right? If he would just get rid of Ta-Nehisi Coates, the activist writer writing this Superman movie, just imagine the drafts he's already given WB and they clearly keep on rejecting. This reminds me of the Ava DuVernay situation with New Gods. They never recruited her to do New Gods, but she kept on giving them pictures. And in the end, they kept on rejecting them. So many that she has a friendship with Tom King, the legendary, iconic comic book writer, and he tried to help her. Again, her pitch was rejected. In the end, she had to give up. And, when WB saw what Snyder had done with Darkseid, and the gods, they knew there's no way her pitch could ever see the light of day. And because I don't think it's just WB who had to sign off on New Gods. I don't think it's as simple as that when it comes to those types of characters. Legally speaking, I don't know really if WB have all the rights to those characters or if other people have to sign off on them. That's interesting. Another conversation, of course, for another time. So, would I like to see a J.J. Abrams written and directed Superman Elseworld movie? Yes. If you want to tell a black Clark Kent story, by all means, do a Val Zod movie. Maybe starring Michael B. Jordan. Do a President Superman movie. Yeah, that's cool. I'm not against a black version of Superman. I'm against Clark Kent being black because he's not black. I'm against rewriting, fictional history, real life history, as Hollywood are doing. Nobody wants this movie. Ta-Nehisi Coates is an activist, and he's not a good writer anyway, right? Nobody wants this, right? Nobody wants to see this happen. I think even most black people don't want to see this happen. Actually, right, I'm sure I've got black subscribers and black viewers. With the greatest of respect, why don't you comment down below and let me know what would you rather see? President Superman, who is a black Superman, a Val Zod Superman movie, or a black version of Kal-El Clark Kent, the last son of Krypton? I'm guessing I know what your answer will be. I'm sure there'll be a couple of you just to kind of be annoying that you're going to pretend you want a black Clark Kent. But the truth is, most sane people don't want that because there's no point in this. And Ta-Nehisi Coates isn't a Superman fan. Ta-Nehisi Coates is another progressive. They will pretend to you that they believe in compassion and kindness and equality. But deleting white Superman and making him black has nothing to do with compassion or kindness or equality. It's about deleting white characters and replacing them with diverse characters. It's about revenge. It's not about equality. Let's be clear. It's about revenge because in the old days, mostly white people were starring in movies. Mostly men were starring in movies. Mostly men were directing TV and movies. Women and black people and diverse people weren't allowed, especially in front of the camera, because they were scared it was off-putting to the viewer. They're the facts of the situation. That, of course, was wrong. But that was the mindset, not only of Hollywood at the time, but of the public, right? Let's be honest. That's what the product of that time was, right? And unfortunately, Gen Z and progressives want to rewrite that problematic history. You can't do that. In 60 years' time, this era will be deemed as problematic. Cancelling people, lying about men, harassing women will be seen as problematic. Extremism and the progressives will be seen as problematic in 60 years' time, right? So every era, every generation blames the one before, like the Mike and the Mechanic song says. What a beautiful song that is, by the way, one of my favourites. But yeah, so the true answer here is, right, if J.J. Abrams wants to write and direct a Superman Elseworld movie, because I'm sure he's got a multitude of ideas, I'd be all for that. Abrams is in hiding, really, at the moment. He's not really doing anything. He was meant to be developing a bunch of projects for WB. They did a very, very lucrative deal with him. Well, lucrative for him, not for them. And as soon as David Zaslav took over WB, he said, no, this deal is bad. It's a non-exclusive deal. He's getting too much money and he's been sitting on his backside, taking the money and doing no work. God knows what he was doing instead. So, he kind of basically booted Abrams out. But it seems to me this Elseworld Superman movie, this woke Superman movie, is a contractual obligation that Zaslav can't get rid of. And that's why it's still in active development. It's a bit like your milk. You buy some milk, right? You wait for it to go out of date. If you wait for it, you don't drink it by the time it goes out of date. It curdles and you throw it away. You pour it down the sink and you throw it away. Well, that's what they've got to do with this movie. Wait until it curdles, go out of date, then they'll say it's not in development any longer, right? As I say, there's so many films and TV shows in development that you and I will never see. So just because, now it is interesting though, as I said earlier, so all of that's interesting. I may be right in what I'm saying. I'm right in the way the industry runs things in active development, but it is interesting that Gunn answered that question. Was it an easy question for him to answer? So he answered it? I don't know. But it does open a kettle of fish. It does create problems. And it also reminds me of this film being announced back in 2019. And everybody understanding it was another way of deflecting from the Snyderverse. It was another way of burying the Snyderverse. But not in a good way, right? If they said we're replacing Cavill with another actor, right, an accurate casting, nobody would have cared. But we all knew what that movie was going to be. So why did that movie never happen in the first place? It's weird they even announced it. Could it be that from the very beginning, that film was just meant to be an announcement and not an actual movie? As I say, just to bury the lead, just to bury the attention across, about the Snyderverse. Don't forget, at the time, we were fighting to release the Snyder Cut. It was back in 2019. Don't forget, the Snyder Cut, I don't think was announced to be coming until, I think, March 2020, and it was released in, May 2021? Something like that. Anyway, so back in 2019, as far as I'm aware, we didn't know if we were ever going to see the Snyder Cut. So it was part of this power struggle between Snyder fans and WB. And it was a very interesting evening when that was announced. But as I said earlier, it does pose the question, doesn't it? How in control is James Gunn if this is still happening? Because as I said earlier, there's no way Gunn wants this. Like he doesn't want the Batman 2. Like he probably doesn't want Joker 2. He just wants his stuff. He just wants to do his thing. But here's the truth. He keeps on saying he's in control of the Elseworlds, he's in control of what Todd and Matt are doing. He's not. He's saying that out of ego, because he has to say it, because officially he's co-CEO of DC Studios. And all these movies officially come under the DC Studios banner, which doesn't mean anything. He's in control of what he's developing, and that's that. The other stuff, the Elseworld stuff, the J.J. Abrams produced woke Superman movie, it's nothing to do with him. If it was up to him, that movie wouldn't be in active development. The question now is, will we ever see the J.J. Abrams produced movie? Because is Ta-Nehisi Coates still working on this movie? Is he still writing a script? Is there any chance of this movie ever happening? I don't follow Ta-Nehisi Coates on social media. I think he's on Instagram. Actually, later on, I may check out his Instagram and see if he's mentioned anything about it. But I can assure you, right, that it's very unlikely that this film ever sees the light of day. So as I say, it's very interesting that Gunn even answered the question. But as I say, I don't think Gunn wants this. But, because, look, as I said earlier, imagine if they were developing both this Superman and Legacy at the same time. It would be so weird, because you can't have two. What do you give your attention to? This is why they won't release the Ayer cut, because at the end of the day, it takes attention away from what they're doing, and it brings back the old conversation of creative bankruptcy and what they did to Snyder, what they did to Cavill, what they did to Ayer in the first place. all the directors who should have had roles at the DCEU who were fired, right? People like the original female director who was going to direct the first Wonder Woman movie, who was Snyder's picked, who was fired. The director who was originally going to do The Flash, right? I forgot his name. You know, the black guy. He was originally going to direct the Flash movie. Very talented director. Gone. We lost a lot of talent because of WB's interference, and in the end they drove Snyder out. And, you know, it's very interesting, as I keep on saying, because the Snyderverse is aging very well indeed. Interestingly enough, we found out today that Scott Stuber is leaving Netflix. The guy who's been running Netflix for years is leaving and starting up his own company. Is it a production company? Is it a studio? It looks like he's going in competition with the company he's helped to build up. Very, very interesting indeed. But let's get back to this Black Superman movie. Let me know if you think this movie is actually going to happen. I don't see how and when this movie can ever happen. But it's very, very embarrassing that after nearly 5 years, this film is in active development. They haven't cast anyone. They ain't built any sets. It's just a writer keep on writing drafts that get rejected by the studio. And I can only see this continuing. It's also embarrassing for James Gunn that he's still asked about this movie. This movie has nothing to do with him. It proves he's not totally in control at what happens at DC. It's a mess, everyone. We shouldn't live in an era where we should even have to think about a black version of Clark Kent. No, that's not racism. As I've said before, quite happy to see a President Superman. Quite happy to see a Val Zod. Val Zod's got a great backstory, a very interesting story. They were going to give us a Val Zod streaming show. Why aren't they doing that anymore? Michael B. Jordan was going to be involved with Static Shock. Now, in some corners, I hear that's still in development, but where? Where is it? Where is it? Right? So they were going to do all this stuff, right? DC, DC stands were very excited about the development of Static Shock in live action. I can't even tell you what it's really about. I know nothing about it, but people were getting excited. Especially, DC fans of color, right? So I don't know where that is, if it's ever going to happen. Again, very unlikely, even though in some corners, apparently, that is also still in active development. That means jack shit. It proves to you and to me that despite James Gunn coming on board, despite there now being a DC Studios, there's too many fingers in the DC pie making decisions. But I can promise you that Zaslav, Discovery, Gunn don't want this movie to happen. No, they don't want this movie to happen. Of course they don't. They would go absolutely insane if this movie started casting and announcing shoot dates, right? The only thing I can see at this time is J.J. Abrams writing and directing a Superman Elseworld movie himself, right? Which, in certain circumstances, I would be very excited about. And as a Superman fan, be very interested in. Because I do rate him as a writer-director. He's made many mistakes. It was a big mistake to leave Star Trek and go on to Star Wars. Big mistake, especially only having the intention of doing the first one. He should have done the trilogy. That's where that franchise's real problems really begun. I'm assuming Abrams really didn't have any ideas beyond The Force Awakens. But then why'd you bring in Rian Johnson to change everything when a trilogy has already been set up? Weird stuff there. That's not for us to discuss right here and right now. But I do think that J.J. Abrams is a huge Superman fan. He's always wanted to make a Superman movie. So I think it's kind of strange in the first place why he was only producing this movie and bringing in Ta-Nehisi Coates. Look, of course, Abrams is another progressive. He's part of the woke mind virus. Of course he is, right? they're all as bad as each other over there in California. I get it, right? But despite all of that, I still think he's a talented guy who could give us a great Superman movie. The problem is, you can't, as I said earlier, you can't be developing two Superman movies at the same time. So this film rearing its ugly head again just goes to show you that there's invisible leadership over at WB. The same leadership that made the decision to replace Sasha Calle. Or let's say that again. The same leadership that decided to replace Henry Cavill with Sasha Calle. The same leadership that decided to remove a white Superman from the DC Extended Universe and develop a black Clark Kent Superman, right? These are the decision makers that are still there behind the scenes. And there's got to be a reason why this film is still in active development. I've given you my explanation through a contractual, obligation from the studio, because I can't think what else it can be. Because I don't believe a serious studio would still be entertaining this, considering they got James Gunn writing and directing a Superman movie. So it doesn't really make any sense why this movie is in active development. And what happens is, James Gunn responds, yeah, it's still in active development. And the whole internet starts talking about it. People start doing videos about it and talking nonsense. What I try and do is be balanced and tell you the truth, that you've got no chance of seeing this film, because look at it. We're talking about nearly 5 years later. If this film was ever going to happen, it would have happened by now. By God, it would have started production and shooting and casting and building sets a long time ago. That's what James Gunn's apparently doing right now. He's getting ready to start shooting Superman Legacy in March. His Superman film is going to happen. That's in production, right? Pre-production, production, right? That's how it works. The J.J. Abrams produced woke Superman movie is in active development. It's not being produced. It's not in pre-production, and it won't go into production, right? Anytime soon, or in the near or distant future. That means the whole thing is bullshit. So as I say, then you have to ask, why is it still in active development? Because they can't officially say it's not happening. And it's very, very embarrassing. It's a very bad look. If it were me, if I was James Gunn and someone asked me this question, I would ignore it. I wouldn't even respond. I'm sure he ignores some questions. But it's interesting that he didn't really want to be seen to be ignoring this question, but also he only had a yes. He didn't go into. For example, he wrote a monologue when asked if he was going to have open casting calls for Superman Legacy, or if he had open casting calls for Superman Legacy. He was speaking about how they're complicated, you get too many people turning up, they're not the right people, what you're looking for when you're looking for specifics. Yeah, open casting calls are a pain in the fucking ass because there's so many actors turning up and it's a fucking meat market. That's why directors don't like them, because they're too much like hard work, because auditioning is very, very difficult in the first place. So having thousands of actors turn up in one area isn't the funnest thing to do as a director. But he was happy to write a monologue about his thoughts on open casting calls. But when he was asked about the J.J. Abrams produced Black Superman movie, he had one word: yes. That's it. Because he doesn't know anything more about this movie than you and I do. It's a blimp. It's a dot. It's something that has no realism to it. Something that realistically will never happen. But it does remind us of all the bad behaviour that was going back then when we were fighting to release the Snyder Cut, and the kind of announcements they were making. Why did they think that was a good tactic? Well, because they could announce that J.J. Abrams was going to be involved in a Superman movie. That would get us all excited and maybe make us think, who needs to release the Snyder Cut if J.J. Abrams is making a Superman film? If they left it at that, they may have got their way. But once they said he was producing, not writing and directing, a black Clark Kent, Last Son of Kal-El Superman movie, then people said, fuck this, release the Snyder Cut.